Shalom. This is the Ger in Parshas Yayishlach. Thank God it's Friday. Shabbos is coming. So we'll just... there's three things that I want to highlight in this Parsha. It's chocked full of stuff. I had my pick, plethora of things in here to choose from. So I'll start right in the very beginning. Basically in this week's Parsha, YAAKOV is going back home, and he's going back home with his family after he's been with Lavan, his uncle, for a while. And he's about ready to meet Esav, so it starts out, and YAAKOV sent angels before of him to Esav his brother, to the land of Seir, the field of Edom, and he charged them, saying, Thus shall you say to my lord, to Esav, So said your servant YAAKOV, I have sojourned with Lavan, and I have lingered until now. So Rashi says something very interesting. He says that im Lavan garti, which is the Hebrew for with Lavan I sojourned. Garti is lashon, basically that he sojourned. This is garti, I have sojourned. And basically that he became a ger with Lavan. Basically, he wasn't trying to settle down there. He wasn't trying to make his home there. He was just trying to get a wife and get out and go back to his homeland. And so he was just sojourning through there, and he made himself like a ger there. In exile, he was a ger, which every Jew in exile is a ger. I don't care if you're a Jew in France, England, Australia, any of these countries. You're not in Israel, then you are in exile. You're in the diaspora. Well, all Jews in Israel are also in the exile because we're still in the exile. But if you are from these other countries, you are in the position of a ger, a sojourner among these other countries. So he also says that Garti is the gematria of 613, which he was saying that while I was with Lavan, I kept all the 613 commandments. Also, another idea of conversion, because a convert is one from the nations who was not born Jewish or to the nation of Israel, and takes upon himself the responsibility of the nation of Israel and the commandments of God. So, this is, I saw in another place the Rebbe bring this up, and he gives accolades to YAAKOV for basically not taking on the customs of the area and not being affected by their manners and the things that they did, because they were tricksters, because the word arami is lashon ramai, which is a trick, and they were known for tricking people. So this was to YAAKOV's credit, and obviously we see the obvious allusion to the ger. Now, we fast forward to later on in the Parsha, and we begin to deal with Esav's life and what he did, and what land he inhabited and what kingdoms he created. And it says, it mentions something very interesting. There's a psuk in chapter 36:12, and says, and Timna was a concubine of Eliphaz. And Timna, I'll just give you a rundown, a quick kitzer, is that Timna was a princess to a chief of Seir. And they mixed with Edom and his families, and Timna was the sister of Lotan, and she was the daughter of chiefs. And so she was a princess, but she wanted to be part of Abraham's family. And so actually the Gemara brings down that she wanted to convert to Judaism. It's brought down in actually Sanhedrin 99b. So when she wanted to convert to Judaism, she first approached Abraham, and then she approached Yitzchak, and then she approached Yaakov, and they all refused her conversion. So she decided that instead of going to, since they rejected her, she still wanted to be part of the family, and the only other option was to be part of Esav's family. So she decided that she would rather be a concubine in this family. That's how much she esteemed being part of the family of Abraham. And so instead of being a princess in another family, which she would have been much more higher ranking, she lowered herself to get into Abraham's family. But unfortunately, out of that situation came Amalek, which was the arch enemy of the Jewish people and the greatest hater of Jews of all time, who always wanted to destroy the Jews. So there's actually rabbis who take YAAKOV to task about this. And I just want to read you a little excerpt from a book, actually, Apples from the Orchard, a book by Rabbi Wisniewski on the teachings of Yitzchak Ginsburg, Rav Yitzchak Ginsburg, and but more importantly, coming from the Ari, and the Ari has this nice piece in Parshas Behalascha on meriting the land, where he quotes Rabbi Clonimus on this interesting take he has on the merits of being buried in the land of Israel. And so it comes out that basically the reason that finally at the end Yaakov rejected her is because he wanted to be buried in the land of Israel. So it says, Rabbi Shmuel Vital, Rabbi Chaim Vital's son, notes that after Timna became Eliphaz's concubine, she bore him Amalek, the ancestor of the nation that became Israel's arch enemy, and that the sages state that this was because Yaakov, in fact, should have married her. He could have elevated the good in her, evinced by her desire to convert, and thereby nullified the bad in her that became manifest later as Amalek. Thus, from our sages' words, it appears that Jacob erred by not accepting Timna, while in Rabbi Clonimus's exposition, it appears that he was rewarded for repelling her. So you have two different opinions here. One is that he was rewarded for repelling her, and the reward was that he was buried in Eretz Yisrael. The other opinion is that he should have married her, and which is interesting because in this week's parsha in the Midrash Rabbah, it talks about how that Yaakov was punished by Dinah getting raped, because when he went to meet Esav, he put Dinah in a box because he didn't want Esav to look at Dinah and want to marry her. He didn't want to give his daughter to Esav, and the sages say he should have done that, because if he would have done that, Dinah would have transformed Esav over to be righteous, and she would have basically converted him from a Rasha to a Tzaddik. And so that's very interesting that the sages take Yaakov to task for doing the very same thing himself. So, and it goes on to say he resolves this dichotomy by the dichotomy of the two opinions of Rabbi Clonimus and the sages, by proposing that it would have indeed been preferable for Yaakov to marry Timna, even if by doing so he would have forfeited his ability to be buried in the land of Israel. By preventing the emergence of Amalek, he would have saved his descendants much suffering and removed an obstacle in the way of the redemption. One of the conditions that must be met before the redemption can occur is that Amalek's descendants must be wiped out. Not being buried in the land of Israel would be a small price to pay for this, especially since Moses himself was also not buried in the land of Israel, and our sages say that this was in order that he be able to bring the generation that died in the desert to the final redemption with him. So, this is interesting and a very valuable lesson, and we have to learn from this. The interesting point is that there's an opinion that Timna went to each of the Avot, the commentary here, Rabbi Wisniewski says that the reason the Torah tells us who Lotan's sister was is because she wanted to convert to Judaism, but neither Abraham, Yitzhak, or Yaakov would accept her. She even offered to be Jacob's concubine, but Jacob refused her. She then declared, I would rather be a concubine to anyone from this nation, a descendant of Abraham, than a princess in another nation, and indeed became Esau's son's concubine. Timna was a concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. So, one interesting moral lesson out of this is that here you have a midrash, a homiletics, that teaches that a convert was rejected, a potential convert who wanted to convert to Judaism was rejected 3 times. And from this rejection was a catastrophic, disastrous result. And that disastrous result was you had the birth of one of the greatest anti-Semites and greatest Jew haters of all time. If this alone is not reason enough to look at this so-called custom of rejecting a convert 3 times, which is a complete Baba Misa and has no roots in halacha whatsoever. It doesn't appear in halacha anywhere, not at least that I've seen in the Gemara and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. And so, and matter of fact, we actually have homiletic teaching the opposite, that by doing so, which rejection 3 times is a chazacha, that you will create a tremendous evil in this world, because the intention of the Jewish people was to convert the world over to the belief in the one God. And that's the bottom line. And that mission has never changed. And that the reason that the Jews are in exile today is to finish the mission that was given to you. And that's it. That's the bottom line. Now, I'm going to end off with this. Basically, the Haftorah is written by Ovadia. Ovadia was an Edomite convert, our sages say. It's the shortest book in the Tanakh, if not one of the shortest. I could be wrong. Maybe Nahum or... I think it's the only one that is 1 chapter, which is unique and significant because it has to do with conversion to the belief in the one God. And so it's 21 verses, and it speaks of the destruction of Edom. And the sages say of Ovadia that Ovadia grew up among Achaz and his evil wife Yezebel, and that he was a righteous person. But Esau, who grew up among Yitzchak and Rebekah, 2 righteous people, was a wicked person. And so let Ovadia come and prophesy of the destruction of the descendants of Esau. And the sages say of this, that this is like the handle to the axe that comes from the forest itself that will chop it down. And this is an allusion to Christianity, because Rome and Edom and Esau all have to do with Christianity. Matter of fact, the Ari explains that Yeshu, which is Jesus, was a reincarnation of Esau, and that Christianity is the religion of Esau and his descendants. And so basically this euphemism of the dead wood handle, which what is the symbolism of Christianity, is a instrument of torture and death, which is a piece of dead wood, a cross. That is what will come and chop the forest down. So it will